Welcome to the Ag Inspo podcast, where we delve into the dynamic world of agriculture, uncovering the stories that inspire, empower, and drive change. Join hosts Rena and Ron Rabo as they explore the journeys of farmers, entrepreneurs, and leaders who are making a difference as they navigate the critical work of transitioning their operation to the next generation. From navigating family dynamics to developing the next generation of ag leaders, we'll bring you the insights and inspiration you need to thrive in today's ever-evolving agricultural landscape. So whether you're a seasoned industry veteran or just starting out, get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered as we learn from best practices and a few colossal failures on the Ag Inspo podcast.
Yeah, so this is welcome to the Ag Inspo podcast, where you have just missed a 5-minute discussion about mule elopes and kanga deer, right?
Yeah. That's correct. Yes, they're true species in Wyoming.
Certain people like to see them, at odd places, odd hours. Yes.
So we have Chris Payne with us today, and Chris, you and your wife Darcy were at our farm in Wyoming last year for our live fire dinner, and we have a very dear friend that was here also with us. And when you all were driving around, as I was sending you in a million different directions because you guys are willing to help, I think it's important that you put this in perspective and let everyone know how this kanga deer thing even came up.
Well, kanga deer. So the mutual friend that we had with us, we were out in the middle of nowhere trying to find seed to bring back to Ron, and we were kind of half lost. And anyhow, I look over and there's this deer in the borrow pit, and the mutual friend's like, no, that's a kangaroo. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's a deer. Well, we went on down the road. A little while later, I picked up my wife, and so now there's 3 of us in the vehicle. We finished what we're supposed to be doing, and we're coming down, and here's another kanga deer sitting in the borrow pit. And so I stopped in the middle of the road, which just happened to be on the railroad tracks. And as people were fretting about me parked in the railroad tracks that I can see, like 15 miles in each direction, as we had a discussion that it was a deer, not a kangaroo, but then we came to the realization it was a kanga deer.
Because she was insisting that it was a kangaroo.
She pulled it up on Google.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's the
she
problem,
pulls the
right?
pictures up on Google. Google said it was real.
Google said it was real.
You can't prove anything by looking it up on Google.
Well, except that Google piece that she pulled up. So our listeners can actually pull this up. Like you can do like a Google search for Wyoming Game and Fish releases kangaroos into the wild. And so when she looked it up, that actually is an April Fool's thing that they did, and it got a lot of people, including maybe a few that I sent it to, who are maybe a little bit more gullible than the normal folks. So when that came up, yeah, she would, and she still swears that they're kanga deer. Yes. And so, when we got on right now, before we went live, you asked me if I'd seen any kanga deers, which I have not actually. But last night we were in central Wyoming yesterday, seeing my middle son for Father's Day. And so we were driving back last night, and between the town that we were in, which is Lander, Wyoming, to Rawlins, Wyoming, which is kind of a long, barren stretch of highway. And there's really basically nothing. Except there are mule elopes, and those are antelope that have the heads of mules, and they're all over in the bar ditches, and you just have to be careful that you don't hit them. But when you look at them at first, they look like a mule, except they're really not, because they're an antelope. So we're going to let this mutual friend of ours know that the next time she's here, we're going to have to go up in that area so she can, get a fill and have a look at those things as well.
She can put those to her list, of mule elopes of animals that she's seen.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep. Super important stuff here that we cover on Ag Inspo, and a purely educational program.
Right. Yeah. And nothing but the truth at all times. All right. Well, Chris, we're so glad that you could be with us today. You have just been such a great friend to Ron and I, and we're excited to dig into your story today and hear about where you were and where you are now, because there's just a lot of cool twists and turns to your story that I think our listeners are going to be very inspired by. So why don't you go ahead and kind of introduce yourself officially to everyone?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Chris Payne. My wife, Darcy, and I live in Ontario, Oregon, which is about a mile from the Oregon-Idaho border. So we are literally in Idaho for the most part. There is one little chunk in Oregon that is in the mountain time zone, and that is us. So, we pretty much hang with the Idaho on just about everything. My wife and I grew up about 20 minutes from where we live today and where we farm. We have 3 kids. One is a son that's 25, is married, has an 18-month-old, a son that literally got married 3 days ago, and a daughter that just graduated from high school 2 weeks ago. So it's been a busy spring in our neck of the woods.
It's awesome.
The bigger question is when are you guys not extremely busy?
True statement. True statement.
Yeah.
So take us back like 12 years ago. Where were you 12 years ago, and how did this journey of, I'm not even going to say how I would describe you today, but just tell us about the starting of the journey for you.
So I'll even go a little bit further than that. My wife and I got married in 1995. She was going to Boise State. I worked in a cold storage warehouse in moving French fries for the first couple of years of our marriage. I decided I wanted to be an ag field man. And so I went to the local fertilizer company, Simplot Grower Solutions, and was trying to get on there. And they're like, we don't know that that's right. There's no place. So long story short, I went to another fertilizer company that I went to work for. I'd worked there about 2 years, and one of the really good growers in our area. We grow a lot of onions, sugar beets, corn, wheat, and alfalfa in our area. There's actually more onions grown here, well, there was at that point, than anywhere else in the United States. And so I went to my manager and I told him what I wanted to do. And he says, yeah, you need to go work for this guy for a few years, learn how to farm right, and then you can come back and go to work for us. So I did. And then a couple of years turned into 4 to 6. And then in 2008, we'd had trouble with on the farm with getting a custom operator to put up hay decently. And so I made a deal with the boss that I would buy a baler and a tractor to do the hay on my own and just start a little business there as they were getting closer to retirement. And so I thought, well, I better have something for that. So then in 2011, they decided to retire. In those 3 years in between there, this little side hustle I had done started to grow really, really big. And so when they retired, we rented 400 acres from them to farm. And then we're doing several thousand acres of hay and alfalfa and straw to farm with. So from 2011 to 2015, we grew a few acres, grew in size a little bit, a few acres. In our area, onions is king, and everything revolves around onions and preparing ground for onions and that way. So a lot of my neighbors were seeing ground that I was renting that had not had onions on it for a while. And so I was starting to get a lot of pressure from neighbors to rent that ground out from under me to grow onions. And I finally said, all right, fine. If this is what it's going to take, I will grow onions. And so in 2015, we grew our first onion. In 2018, we bought into an onion packing warehouse. In our area for the longest time, most of the packers have been custom packers. And as time's gone on, it's kind of transferring into grower-owned packing your own onions. And so we bought in with 5 other entities into a packing shed. And that kind of, we were growing about 100 to 125 acres, which was kind of the normal amount of onions grown on smaller farms in our area for the longest time. Of course, like anything, farms were growing in size, and so it was getting bigger. But then in 2021, one of the other partners and I ended up taking over and buying out the rest of the partners that were retiring from our packing shed. And so today we farm we're growing about 400 acres of onions. And my partner's growing about 400 also. Packing all of our own onions. And like I say, we grow sugar beets, corn, alfalfa, and wheat as rotational crops. And there. So kind of a broad overview.
It's really amazing, like to go from working for a farmer to being a custom operator to being the farmer. What are some of the things that you feel open doors for you? Because I know there's a lot of people out there that, like, when we're traveling around, they'll say, "Oh, well, I'll never be able to get into farming. It's too expensive to get in. I don't own land." There's a lot of beliefs that if you don't inherit a farm or inherit machinery, that you just simply are not going to be able to farm. But you have been able to do that. What were some of the things that you felt were part of the reason for that opportunity, or the success factors as you look back?
It's so the one of the original agreements were when we decided we kind of wanted to farm and we knew that our employer was going to retire. There had been a conversation that we could possibly take over the farm and rent the farm from them. When that time came, there was two brothers. They split the farm pretty much 50-50. And one of the brothers decided that he wanted to go a different route. And one brother decided, I think I'll let you do it. And so giving him credit that he took a chance on us and rented us that first 400. After that, I think that we always felt like we had to be perfect in order to succeed. And so we tried really, really hard, just like everybody, to do the best job possible, but be perfect at it. And so I think that's kind of the way we did things, the quality that we were showing in the field made statements. And that has kind of led to open several doors from other farmers that are retiring to give us the opportunity, that have come to us and said, "Hey, we'd like you to rent our ground." Our area is highly row crop, like I say, with the onions. And so if you've ever been in a heavy row crop area, there's no weeds. Everything's perfect, quote, perfect. But it's a lot about visual, how things look, and making sure that you do it right. And so I think we've kind of been able to show that we know what we're doing. We take care of the ground. We don't try and bleed fertilizer out of it and take it. We try and do as best we could, just like we own all of it. And so we actually have had several growers come to us to do that.
That's
I
really
think
amazing.
that probably. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's even amazing in itself, Chris, because being a young farmer that doesn't have like two generations of legacy behind you, to have farmers coming to you, which is basically kind of new kid on the block, to say, "Hey, rent our ground." What has caused farmers to look for you? I mean, obviously you're doing a great job out there, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that do a great job and maybe have been around for a lot longer.
I will say that. So the one farm that comes to mind we had, and one day the gentleman was walking down this was before we had the farm. He was walking down the road and I stopped. I said, "Hey, you need a ride?" And so I gave him a ride back to his tractor. And this is a farm that I had driven by as a kid for years and years, and had always admired what this guy did. And he says, "So how come you haven't come to ask me to rent this farm?" And I looked at him and I says, "Gordon," I says, if you would like to visit with me about renting the farm, I would be joyed. But I'm not going to beat your door down. So when the time comes that you want to make that decision, I'd love to visit with you, but I'm not going to bring it up." And so it was about 2 years later, one morning, my phone rang and he says, "You still interested in this farm?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "And get over here now." And so that's what we did.
Well,
I love it.
yeah, that's a different spin, I think, than it seems like that as farms have gotten bigger and as agriculture has changed, that we've gotten maybe a little bit further away from that relationship piece. Would you attribute your success to one particular thing that you've done, or a handful of things that you've done that really set yourself aside from a landowner's perspective versus some of the other folks who are farming in your area?
I'll go back to that. The lack of being pushy to a lot of these guys. I know this gentleman that was actually have two of them now that have had, big farms come in that, offer them cash on the barrel for the whole place. And I think there's a lot of these older farmers that are like, this whole thing's not about money. We want family farms to still thrive. And at the point that we were doing a lot of this, my boys were not back on the farm yet. And I think the prospect that they might have more kids back on the farm, might be an actual family farm, really has, means something to some of these guys. And I think the relationship of just treating people right. I have one landlord that when we signed the deal, he still wanted to be able to make waste ditches in our area. So we do a lot of surface irrigation so the water runs off the fields and to the end into a waste ditch. And so the deal was he got to make the waste ditches and spray weeds. And one day after we'd been on it for a couple of years, one morning he was spraying weeds, and he's 80 years old at this point, or 82. And he corners me and says, he says, what would you do if I wasn't here to help you? And he went on and on for a while. And finally I looked at him and I says, we are just keeping you alive. And it gave him the opportunity. He looks at me and says, yes, because it gave him the opportunity to retire slowly on his terms and not be shoved out. And I think that meant a lot to these guys as we try and keep them very involved with what's going on the farm. We try and keep them involved with, how the markets are and that kind of stuff. And that way they don't feel like they just got shoved out immediately. And I think just treating people like you'd want to be treated is probably one of the biggest things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You've had a lot of opportunity, it sounds like, in terms of just people calling you. So acres maybe were coming at you fast and furious. The packing shed was an opportunity that you probably weren't necessarily anticipating. How have you and Darcy been able to manage the growth? Because you've had some tremendous growth in a short amount of time.
Well, a little bit of insight on onions. So to grow an acre in onions, your input costs are somewhere around $12,000 an acre right now for input cost. So before I started, my old boss used to tell me, he goes, don't grow more onions than you can afford to lose. And so that is one of the reasons for the first few years, we just did not have the cash to be able to do that, to grow onions. And the risk factor was part of it also. So as we've grown, I think being my wife worked for a CPA for years, and having the bookkeeping abilities to be fine-tooth combed and make sure that things are where they need to be has been a huge plus for us. Her ability to make sure that the financial piece hits. There's been a lot of times it's like, hey, but bank account's empty. We got to have money for payroll, and there's been some really great things, that have happened in that. We actually have one customer that this was right as we were getting started. One day he called and he says, hey, if you need money for this spring, he says, just holler. He says, I'll prepay some hay, a big dairy. And so there's been some blessings that have come through from guys really helping. Certain banks, when we started out, wanted nothing to do with this because we had no experienced parents or anything behind us. Then after we've been running for a while, they come back, and we've stuck with the ones that brung us. And so I think that means a lot too, to be able to have good professionals in the background. That being said, we've kind of outgrown, about 2 years or 3 years ago, we realized that we were growing so rapidly that we really needed some help. And so we had the opportunity to go to the Dirt Project and be able to learn about the transition and succession, which we were expecting more about that with our kids. But the benefit of going there was learning more about how we're running our business, from managing people to managing meetings to, just lots of different of the regular day-to-day operations, which was a huge benefit for us. And of course, still a work in progress of being able to put those, the things we learned into rubber meets the road, but we're working on it. And so that's been a huge part of that.
I remember when you came to the Dirt Project the first time, and how you introduced yourself, that you're a first generation farmer. I mean, you don't have an agriculture background. You didn't grow up on a farm or a ranch. I mean, this is what you have in front of you and what you've done. You and Darcy have created it. And I think that there's a lot of people out there, younger folks especially, right, that would love to get started in agriculture. They don't think it's possible. I think you're a total inspiration for that. What would you say to those folks about, obviously it's possible, you've done it, right? What would you attribute some of your success to in as far as saying, look, I don't have any kind of a background in agriculture, but we've been able to create this tremendous farm that you've created. How does someone who wants to get started even begin to work in that direction?
Well, a little sidebar on your thinking. So Darcy and I both did grow up on farms. We both grew up on dairy farms, and but her parents had kind of gone a different direction, and mine were in no position to add people. So when we left home, I actually went to college to be a secondary ed teacher. Had no intentions of coming back to the farm. And so, yes, we were on farms, but when we ended up on row crop farms, it was totally different than we had no background there. That being said, your question was to how to get started on that. And I honestly don't know if there was one single thing. I think sometimes just taking a chance of being able to put the foot in and say, hey, let's go. Being able to have social skills to visit with people and, convince them to take a chance on you, and being that, and knowing, that you're a good person and that they can do things with you. And I think the good Lord plays a large part in that. I think blessings come, everybody calls, luck, miracles, however you want to go about it. But I think it's miracles and luck are out there, but a lot of times we create some of those also, and the blessings from, that are bestowed on our heads are great. So I think that plays a big part in it also.
Yeah. How important has it
answer
been
your question
to
on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think you really nailed it in the sense that I think some of the simple things because we built our farm in a different way than what you did. But I know, kind of starting from scratch, it's a huge challenge. But really, I think that authenticity that you can show people that, look, I'm not trying to be a threat here, but I am trying to just build a business that I hope will work for myself and my family, and really showing that over time and building trust with those people. I mean, that's really what, to me, the crux of your answer is that, you have to build trust with people that you're working with. And once you build that relationship and those people know that they can trust you, a lot of times they are willing to take a chance. And so the comment that you made about building those social skills, it's, we all think that as farmers, what we need to do is we have to really be excellent at, crop rotations and fertilizer and spraying applications and markets and hedging and all of those things that go along with farming. But what we fail to recognize is that building the relationships and having those soft skills in knowing how to work with other people and knowing how to communicate with those people, You can't put a dollar number on that. It's massively important.
I'd agree with that 100%.
What was
That's definitely.
I'm sorry, Chris. Sorry.
Go ahead. You're good.
I was just going to ask you, what was your first job when you started working for the farmer that you worked for before you started the custom? What was your very first job? What did you do for him?
Oh, well, we came in the winter. So I would say that really the number one job that he hired me for was running a sprayer, to be the chemical applicator. There was lots, like on the farm, you do lots of different things, but that was probably the first main major job that I did, is I took that over. Coming from a fertilizer company that I'd worked for a couple of years, I'd been running a floater and stuff. And so I think it was a short hop over to the sprayer doing that. That being said, the fertilizer company came back to me. So in 2006, they came to me and wanted me to go into the custom business spraying for them and leave the farm. And I couldn't pull the trigger. One of those hindsights, you think back of those times in your life, you're like, well, is it the right time, wrong time? And I guess it was the wrong time. So,
yeah.
So I know this from my perspective, and you and I have talked about this a little bit. A lot of times when you're the new guy on the block, it ruffles feathers.
Yep.
And in agriculture in our communities, and it's unfortunate, but that is the way it is. I know what your answer is, and the fact that has that happened to you, but how do you deal with that? And I think that I've had almost every single time I go speak somewhere, and a young producer will come up to me and they're enormously challenged by that particular thing, that has really become very burdensome for them and very hard for them to overcome, because a lot of times they're dealing with people that have, they have a lot more perceived power and money and land and the whole works. And they're really just trying to make it in family agriculture and trying to build their operations. And how have you dealt with that as your business has grown?
Well, I think that's a really good point. And you never know where it's going to come from, whether it's someone that's close to you, someone that's, just in the neighborhood. As old farmers and older farmers go along, a lot of times we all get stuck in our ways of doing things. And when new people come in, it gets frowned upon that, oh, you're doing what? You're going to try it. Well, you're driving a new tractor? We've driven the old tractor for years and years. And how did you do that? Why are you doing that? So those questions are always out there. And I guess, in short, to answer your question, the way I have taken and dealt with it is I've used it as motivation. When somebody says you can't, or you won't, or that, I've put it as a chip on my shoulder and said, you know what, I'm gonna. And so I think I've used that as just a building block to drive me to go for that, to be perfect, to, like we were talking about, to be perfect in everything that we do. Have we achieved that? Of course not. But I think that's you've got to find something to motivate you in life, not just money and not just the way of life, or that you've got to have something to motivate you. And I think that's what I've done, is just taken those negative things and used them as motivation to be better at what we do.
I would add that I think that you're really good at keeping perspective, and you're really good at the humor game. And so there's hardly, and Rena, you probably agree with this, right? Like, there's pretty much never a time that you're ever going to talk to Chris and Darcy Payne where they're going to be like, they might be in the toilet, but they're not going to ever let you know that, because they're just super positive people, and they always have this glass is half full perspective. And to me, that's so important, that it's easy to get drugged down, but it's I always tell my boys, I say, you can control three things in your life: your words, your thoughts, and your actions. But the hard thing about that is everyone else does that as well. And we can't control the way that they respond to us, the way that they treat us, the way that they, carry their selves, but we can control that. And so I think it just puts it in perspective that you have a very clear understanding of that, and you're really good at just rolling with the punches. Just saying, hey, it's all good. Tomorrow's a new day. Everything's going to be okay. And you keep smiling, you keep moving forward. I admire that about you. It's a great perspective. It's a great learning thing.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting that you say that. There's about three things popped in my mind. There is one, happy people like being around happy, positive people. They don't want to be around Eeyore. Eeyore gets old in a hurry.
Yeah.
And sure. The second one is my mother. So my mother got breast cancer for the first time when I was a senior in high school. She ended up having it at 8 years, and the second mastectomy 8 years later. She had diabetes. She had a myriad of health issues. But my mother was the eternally happy person. You very, very rarely ever heard her complain about something. It was the sun was always shining, and in her world. And so I guess that's one of the things of just being happy and being, even when things are bad, to be able to just move forward. The other one, the third thing that popped into my mind right there as you were saying that. So my daughter has played softball all the way through school and stuff. And one of the big things that we've tried to teach her and her teammates and stuff is the fact that when you make a mistake or something goes right, you got to flush it. You got to flush it and move on to the next one, because there's something else that's coming right now. And if you sit there and dwell on the bad things, you're going to strike out. If you struck out and you go out in the field and the balls hit you, your chances are you're going to muff that. So you got to be able to move on and just keep putting the next foot forward and make next play up. And I think those three things really are all about the attitude and a positive attitude.
Yeah, I think, that is a really good segue into the fact that you've got, you thought you were going to have one son that was coming back home, and you ended up having two sons in the same year express interest in coming home. So now you've got two sons at home and two daughter-in-laws that were not necessarily expected. And so how has some of the things that like your parents taught you, Darcy's parents taught her, how have some of those things now translated into things that you're talking to your kids about in terms of expectations and entitlement, and how you're merging these, two new families into your farming operation?
That is a great question. Our parents literally did none of that, because we didn't go back to those farms, but those are farms that, my in-laws still farm. My parents, of course, do not. But we never learned anything really from those situations. That being said, to prepare us to come back, we've had, as I've grown through the farming and stuff the last 15 years, we've got several neighbors that are all, family farms, multiple families and stuff. And I've seen several different ways of how they have managed those farms. Some have done well, some have not done well. And so that's kind of been probably the biggest learning part of it right there, is seeing how they've done those things and be able to glean from them things that have worked. That being said, with our boys, we are just in the wee stages of this, and that's why you, Rena, and the Dirt Project have really been instrumental in being able to help us down those paths, from making family employment policies and stuff, just to try and head off some of those issues. I think the entitlement issue. I think and I think this is across society, the entitlement from kids today is huge, and having to deal with that is probably the biggest part of this that we struggle with. And it's not that they're standing here with their hands out, but it's just little things that society has told them that they don't need to do. And having to learn that they do need to do that. That is a big struggle.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of families when kids come home, because they're, right now, kids coming out of college have some really huge opportunities to get some really nice jobs at really great salaries for, your first year of full-time employment. And there is a lot of expectations about, things like work-life balance and time off and how long should my day be and can I go home for lunch? That there are some businesses that can offer those types of things, but agriculture just in general tends not to be one of them, particularly in your first few years home. So how have you and your sons and Darcy kind of talked about those things? Have those been really open, transparent discussions about expectations, or have those sort of been like, oops, we didn't talk about that, now we've got a little monster, so we better get to the table and talk about it before that thing gets big and nasty? How have you found your approach to be? Really straightforward, or kind of catching them as they show up?
Kind of catching them as they show up. We've got some little monsters that think fertilizer is helping them grow. So, but it definitely, we have talked about it, but not as well as we should. I think that being able to have open conversations is great, but it is not easy. I think there's always a fear. There's a fear that you don't want to ruin a family relationship at this point, even though if you don't do it, you would have a really good chance of ruining it down the road. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is trying to say, okay, we need to run that risk today and not 5 years from now.
How have you felt that that's been received by your sons? Like when you have to have one of those tough, maybe a little bit uncomfortable conversations, how have they taken that, and what has sort of been the outcome of just addressing those things early and kind of head on?
One of them has done fairly well. He's been way more open and receptive to it. The other one, I think, is getting a lot of feedback from a spouse. And when you like talk about, we add daughter-in-laws or son-in-laws to the equation, it definitely brings more issues to the table. So I say we have not done as good a job as heading these off as we probably could have, and now we're trying to play catch up with that. But hopefully we can get that done.
Another thing that I know that you guys made a decision about is to put management in between you and your kids, so that you're not necessarily directly managing your sons. Tell us about the decision to do that, and how was that received?
So we had a young man who is 34 at this point. He came to us about 7 or 8 years ago. I don't remember exactly, but anyhow, he was with us for a while, and then he left to go try his own business. Was gone for about a little over a year, and he was struggling with it. So he came back and said, "Hey, I'd like to come back." And so we brought him back. He had been here a little while when my boys came back. So he's a kid that grew up on his grandfather's farm. Struggled in school, like a lot of kids, at school. Struggled with 2 plus 2, but could give him a wiring diagram. He's a genius. And so anyhow, he had kind of earned his time in that. So I just had this feeling that I needed to put him in charge of the boys and others to try and first of all, reward him for the job that he'd been doing, but to try and bring my boys along. My boys, neither one of them wanted to come back to the farm when they left. That was not on their radar. And so I didn't force them to learn a lot of the real nitty gritty, the little things. And so I know they have a lot of those little things to try and, get caught up on. And so I was wanting somebody that could help teach that would probably have a better relationship than dad getting grumpy at them because they weren't doing something that he thought they should have already known. So I had a conversation with the boys when we had this thought, and Darcy and I talked about it. The boys were actually fairly receptive to it. And I told them, I says, if someday you guys are in the ownership team, you're still going to need a farm manager. And so I says, if we put this in now, we can kind of grow this all together. And so they were very supportive of it. I don't know that I've ever heard any negativity
Awesome.
about it. They get along well with him. And I know he's had some really frank conversations with them that I probably would have really struggled with. And so that's been good. So
I love it.
It's working out. We'll continue to cross fingers.
That's awesome.
So I know, Chris, that you have a pretty good handful of employees. Maybe share with the listening audience about how many employees you have, maybe a little bit about how things are structured and how you deal with communication with those employees to keep your operation spinning in the right direction. Because we talked about you being busy at the beginning, but I'm serious. Like Chris Payne is super, super busy. You have a lot going on and a lot of things that can go awry if you're not really engaged with what's happening on your farm.
So we have about 15 or 16 full-time employees on the farm. We have seasonal people that come in from weeding crews that sometimes those weeding crews can be as high as 75 people. We do have some older guys that come in the fall to help drive truck and stuff during harvest. So we have developed a management team. There's actually so my farm manager and one son and I meet every Monday morning to go over stuff. And then we create an agenda for a management meeting with about 6 guys that then take those back to, subcategories, for different jobs. And so the guys, like we have a guy that takes care of a lot of the irrigation. So he goes back, he is a Spanish speaker. So he takes care of most of the Spanish speaking irrigators, work in that direction. We have a guy that's a mechanic, engineer type guy that builds a lot of stuff for us. So he has a guy that works with him. So they, making sure that they are on track to have stuff ready to go during harvest or planting or whatever there. So then we have at the onion shed, we have a management team of about 6, and we have about 50 to 55 people that work from 1st of August through 1st of April, generally, just depending on when our packing season. We have a general manager there that helps take care of that. And we meet with him, my other partner and I, we meet with him during the year, usually once a week, once every other week, just depending on the time of year. And he takes care of a lot of that, running the shed and the people there. And like I say, he has a management team under him. So
Lots going on in the Payne household and on the
yes.
on the Chris and Darcy farm, and it's just really it's inspirational to see someone who is you and Darcy are like top-notch people. And it's really, Rena, she and I just think the world of both of you, and what you built is incredible. But I think one of the things that you guys have always had, despite how big your farm is, and despite what you do and how many people you have and how many acres you have, that you've kept the proper perspective, and you've kept yourselves humble, and you kept the proper perspective in raising your children and making sure that you're a positive influence for others. And I think that is very admirable, and something that we should all aspire to do.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate that. It's like I say, it's a challenge for everybody, and farming is not getting any easier. So we'll just keep moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So to take us out of our talk today, Chris, give us your 1 to 2 top tips that you have for people who are maybe going, man, we just need to light a fire here. We need to get things moving. We need to breathe some life into what we're doing. We need to find some joy, whatever it is. What would be your 1 to 2 top tips?
You talking recreational activities here?
Just what keeps you up and getting up in the morning with a smile on your face? Because I know the first thing you do every morning is you go get everybody coffee. So I know that that's like one of your secret sauce methods is you go get everybody a big old load of caffeine to hand to them as they come to work every morning. But what are the things like that when you're feeling just a little down, a little frustrated? What's your 1 or 2 top tips for getting yourself out of it?
I think a little bit of time away. Like I said, my daughter just finished her senior year of high school in softball, and I learned that I really enjoyed softball, and I've gotten to where my daughter may not be the one playing. It may be a friend, it may be a daughter of another person that we'll just run and watch. Go watch them for an hour with and just to get away and enjoy that. I think you've got to have some time for yourself. I mean, that's everybody knows that, but it's really hard to do, to be able to walk away sometimes for an hour and take care of you. One of your other instructors always talks about working on the farm, not in the farm. And I think that you can take that of working on you, not, at times also, and being able to take care of you, because if you don't take care of you, you can't take care of others in the farm.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, Chris, we thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be excited to check back in with you and see what else is happening in your life shortly. But thank you again for being on. And for everybody who's listening, thank you so much. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Ag Inspo podcast with Ron Rabo and Rena Striegel. Find Ag Inspo on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. For more information about today's guest or the resources referenced today, please see the show notes listed below. Join us next time when we will meet another inspirational leader who has taken those small steps to bring about really big change.